Hey folks, what if I told you there was a build that can help your raid team without needing to ask someone to add a debuff, which is Divinity or Tribrid Cannon, for any raid boss? For so long we've been in the meta where raid teams use Divinity to maintain a simple crit spot for more damage. Plus, Tribrid Cannon started its own way to support the team, but the thing that annoyed me the most is the trade-off for both exotics. Both of them require you to sacrifice your own damage for the team, and that is something that annoys me the most. Divinity's damage trade-off is too severe, but for Tractor, the damage isn't too severe as Divinity, but I still see a damage sacrifice trade-off. Over time, I've seen players use Tractor for debuff support for most raids, and another player on a wall for support to buff the entire team's weapon damage. The loadouts are somewhat okay, but I want a different method to support the raid team. Would you believe me that there was actually a build that can support your entire team without the use of a Divinity or Tribrid Cannon? Well gamers, I present to you guys the Tribrid role build. You guys might be asking, what is the purpose of this build I created? This right here is the ultimate support build for your raid team. Now a lot of you might be surprised that Lumina is on this build, and not many players don't use this. I'll explain why Lumina is on this build later. The class I chose for this build is Night Stalker with Omnioculus. With this build, I can debuff a raid boss for my entire team with either a Shadow Shot or Snare Bomb. You guys might say that Snare Bombs only do a 50% debuff on a target, and the debuff percentage is the same as Divinity. That is true about the debuff percentage. However, the person with Divinity would be forced to laser the boss all the time to maintain the debuff. You can't use your power weapon in the process. With Snare Bombs, you can either Void Dive or throw a Snare Bomb at a boss to apply the debuff without worrying you can't use your power weapon. With Shadow Shot, you'll apply the 30% debuff, but it's a one-time use. You guys might say that one Shadow Shot isn't enough to maintain a longer debuff. It's better to use Tractor rather than a Shadow Shot because it can apply 30% debuff whenever it is needed, plus making the debuff last longer. And that is true that you can do that. However, you are forced to be in shotgun range, and not only that, you're not using a lot of the ammo from it, and at the same time, you're wasting damage from not using the ammo that much. Special weapons weren't designed to be the main weapon for boss damage while using Tractor, since their damage isn't as high as a power weapon. Specials were designed to provide backup for additional damage, just in case you burn all of your ammo from your power weapons. Quick swapping double select Tractor just can't compete for the builds, since power weapons give a higher base damage and a higher total damage. I have a separate video about the downsides of using double select Tractor and what the damage is compared to power weapons. Now, I'll get into why Night Stalker is better than Tractor and Divinity. Shadow Shot can debuff a target, but it's a one-time use. The debuff only lasts for 10 seconds, and the same goes for Snare Bombs. What's even better about this build is that you don't need to use weapons to apply a debuff for your team. All it takes to use this effectively is to either Shadow Shot or throw Snare Bombs to apply the debuff for the team. You can also Void Dive to apply the debuff as well. No need to force someone to use something they don't want to use. With the debuff info out of the way, let's get back into Lumina. Lumina is an awesome support weapon for dungeons and raids. Not many players use this, but the potential behind it is hard to ignore. Lumina can buff you and your teammates by hip-firing the weapon to use the Nova rounds on your teammate from the light remnants you collected from killing a combatant. The Catalyst actually gives you 2 per kill. Now, how much is the buff percentage on the Blessing the Sky for Lumina? The buff is actually 35% to your weapons, much higher than Wall of Radiance, Weapons of Light, and Radiant. This is actually the second highest global buff that exists. The highest one in the game is 40%, but that global buff is only on the Sentinel Shield. Unfortunately, Sentinel Shield isn't worth using because you have to be blocking to provide the global buff for your team, meaning it will do little damage or nothing. The last thing I want to analyze is the exotic chest piece, Omnioculus. This exotic gives you a second smoke on charge, and it gives you damage resistance while invisible. The last part says when you make an ally invisible, they gain damage distance while invisible and you gain melee energy. The invisibility isn't the most important factor for this build, but the extra smoke one charge and the gain melee energy is the main focus for this build. For the void fragments, I chose Echo of Obscurity, Leeching, Dilation, and Persistence. For the aspects, I chose Tribrid's Ambush and Vanishing Step. The triple hunter stats I chose are Mobility, Resistance, and Discipline. You guys might point out why my strength stat is low. I'll explain that part later, but for now, I'll show you guys how good this build is against a dungeon and raid boss.
In the back. That's not what I want you to do, but okay. Yeah, but that's the front. Ooh. Oh, never mind. It might have bounced. I don't know, because it bounced off really weird. Ooh, shit. Yep, and I used some of my fusion, so that's how much damage I want to put in there.
Now that right there is incredible total damage. As you guys can see in the dungeon damage test, you can either trigger the Blessing of the Sky first, or throw down a Shadow Shot to give you and your team a debuff. While you have both your buff and your debuff support going on, you can use your power weapon to do your damage roll, while both effects are still lingering. If you need another snare bomb for weakening, shade set next to an enemy and you'll get your snare bomb instantly. From this point, you won't need to worry about your strength stat, because Gammer's Dodge helps get around that issue, and with the 100 mobility stat, it'll take a moment before you can get your shade stat back to refresh your snare bomb again. Let's take a look at the raid boss damage test to see how it performs.
Let me do another Blessing of the Sky refresh. Oh, I fucking missed. Are you shitting me? There's no way.
As you can see, while I'm damaging one Blessing in the Sky and the weakening effect is still going, you see that I have one snare bomb left to debuff. This is where the exotic chest piece comes into play. I void dive to make my team invisible and both of my snare bombs are refreshed instantly. That's because the chest piece gave me both my snare bombs based on the amount of guardians I made invisible. This build gives me the support role to weaken a boss infinitely without someone using Divinity or Trident Cannon. Most of the time, players would have hybrid roles. If you don't understand what I mean by that, basically what I mean by that is, certain players are going to be on their buff and damage roll for the team, while another player is focused on debuffing and damaging. A player using the Wall of Radiance with their power weapon will be on buff support and damage roll, while those on Tractor with burst supers, including their burst weapon, will be on debuff and support and damage roll. With this build I created, you can have all three roles instead of one player dedicated to buff your entire team and the other player on weakening a boss. You can buff, debuff, and damage all in one with this double support build. However, there are drawbacks that kinda annoy me, but it still works. The drawbacks are no super damage with this build, although you can Shadow Shot to the boss, but it's best to do it on the ground to tether. You need to have an ally to gain the benefit from the Noble Rounds buff. The duration on the Blessing in the Sky only lasts for 10 seconds, which is the same as an armor charge, with no time dilation mods. The Noble Rounds, unfortunately, have a short buff blast radius, so when you do use a Noble Round, best to hope that your teammates are close enough to receive your buff. How short is the buff blast radius on the noble round? Well, I unfortunately don't have footage for that, but the max blast radius I tested was exactly 3 meters to give someone else a noble round from the play you shot first. So in some cases you might buff your team halfway or just the player you hit. The amount of noble rounds is only 6, which is kind of short, but to me, I prefer around 8 to 10 noble rounds. Snare bombs unfortunately have a chance to fly off from your target once you attach the snare. This has been around ever since Night Stalker was introduced in the Taken King expansion. There are times where snare bombs have been working in the way of how they should be, but at some point, you'll have a snare bomb that'll stick, but will fly off randomly from your target. My recommendation to get around the sticky snare bomb inconsistency is to use the Trapper's Ambush, or the Void Dive I call it, to give your team the debuff they need. You're still going to need a Well of Radiance for healing, because no rounds act like Cure, but it doesn't give restoration. Having a Song of Flame with Speaker's Insight isn't a bad idea either, but better hope you can help the team stay alive with your healing turn. Also, in order to get 2 snare bombs back while void diving, you need 4 guardians to turn invisible to gain the melee energy needed while having 1 snare bomb left to use in your own arsenal. If you somehow don't get 2 snare bombs back from your void dive, and you're a bit far from your raid team, chase it next to an enemy to get your snare bomb back and try it again to maintain your infinite debuff roll. Be sure that 4 guardians that you are trying to make them invisible to refresh your snares aren't invisible, because it'll only work if the team isn't invisible. Overall, this is the ultimate double support role build for Dungeons and Raids. I've been using this for a while, and my damage has been around 2.2 to 2.4 million total damage. Everyone else's total damage has been around where my damage is, and a little higher. Lumina is going to be an Onyx Eye to use if you haven't used it the first time, so probably best to practice the functionality of it before trying to assemble this build together. Anyway fellas, that is the Tribrid role build in Destiny 2, and I don't think a Titan or Warlock can achieve this build. So let me know what you guys think of this build, and so far, I haven't seen anyone else come across this build. Before I end this, if anyone ever has a Divinity or Trident Cannon on, and you're using this double support role build, tell the Guardian you don't need either of the two, because you got the debuff support role covered.